Now, we normally park the Starship above England, but in order to interview this week's guest, we have been forced to reposition the Starship above Scotland, and this is due to the draconian bail conditions imposed on our guest, which state that he is not to talk to anyone in England and Wales about his situation. So without further ado, let's reposition the Starship above Scotland. This week's guest is the maker of the documentary 7/7 Ripple Effect. His film describes what most likely happened on the day of the 7/7 London bombings. It provides a compelling case that the alleged terrorists were completely innocent patsies who were duped into taking part in a mock terror drill. In order to speak to our guest, we have repositioned ourselves in Scotland. This is because he is under bail conditions which prevent him from talking to anyone in England or Wales about 7/7. I'd like to welcome on the Starship, on the line from Dublin, our guest this week, MaudDib. Welcome, MaudDib. Are you well?
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Nice to be with you.
Okay. And just to confirm, we are indeed in Fife, Scotland, to put your mind at rest with regards to your bail conditions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And I'd just like to start by commending you on the film, because I think it's a very brave thing to have done, especially bearing in mind the way that you've been treated by the authorities. So well done on your film.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now I know that you believe, as many people do now, that the 9/11 terror attacks and the media story which followed was in fact a false flag event, possibly orchestrated by intelligence agencies, the US authorities and Israel. Now, can you tell us briefly what your thoughts are on 9/11 and the reasons behind it first?
Well, the reasons behind it seem to be that from all the evidence that they wanted, excuse me, the American government and the people behind the American government, the shadow government, wanted an excuse to go into Afghanistan and into Iraq. And so everybody seems to think that that's the reason why 9/11 happened, to give them an excuse to do that. There's lots and lots of evidence that points to the fact that there were no hijackers and that the planes that flew into the buildings were remotely controlled, and that they were not airliners, they were military planes. And then, of course, there's other people who have found thermite residue in the ruins, and which, you know, they're convinced that thousands and thousands and thousands of people, engineers, airline pilots, fighter pilots, all kinds of people are convinced that it was an inside job and that the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition, which is, when you look at the buildings, the footage of the buildings coming down, that's exactly what it looks like. Okay.
Okay, and probably just to stress that they had terror drills going on at 9/11, which is sort of gives us a clue about 7/7.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll come on to that.
Yeah, because apparently there were people who were in air traffic control, and they were saying, you know, is this part of the drill or is this real? Because we have all these different things, anomalies, and so it confused everybody, and it gave them cover to do what they did, which is why it made 7/7 very suspicious with Peter Powers.
Okay, so we'll come on to 7/7. How long after 7/7 happened did you start to suspect there was something wrong with the official story then? Was it
really on the day?
On the day, right.
On the day, yes, because when Peter Powers came on the television and said what he said, you know, that was a red flag straight away, that there was something wrong there. You know, coincidences like that don't happen unless they're planned.
Okay, well, we'll come on to the evidence shortly, but before we do that, I mean, how did you go about making the film, and did you get any help off any colleagues or anything? Because it's a pretty professionally produced piece of work, I have to admit. I mean, I've made a few documentaries myself, and you know, sort of on low budget, you've done a very good job, MaudDib.
Yeah, well, on no budget, really.
Yeah.
You can't get any lower budget than no budget.
Yeah.
But yes, I had a couple of friends who helped to find the articles online and the footage, and then I put the script together. And they helped a little bit with it, but they were wanting to say things that would have got us in trouble. You know, like libel and things like that. So you have to, as you must understand, with running your TV programs, you have to be very careful how you word things to not leave yourself open to being sued and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And you made these in Dublin. You were living in Dublin when you produced the film. Is that right?
In Ireland, yes.
In Ireland.
I did the script, and then they found the relevant newspaper articles and the footage from the BBC program. And then a friend of mine who's very, very good with computers did the actual putting of the film together, and then sending me a copy, and then I would make adjustments and say this needs editing out, this needs doing, and all of that sort of stuff, until I got it. I was planning on getting it finished for the 5th of November for obvious reasons, I would think, to most people, British people anyway.
Okay.
And it just all came together at the right time for the 5th of November. We got all the editing done and got everything smooth and no glitches.
What year was that, MaudDib?
That was in 2007. It was we released it onto the internet on November the 5th, 2007.
Okay.
So it's almost 3 years ago now.
Right.
And since.
Yeah.
Go on.
Did you? I mean, I know for a fact that it's like trying to get blood out of a stone, trying to get your work onto television, onto mainstream channels. So did you send it to any mainstream channels?
Yes, I sent it to the BBC because it was obviously relevant to them, and I sent it to Yorkshire Television. Because it should have been relevant to them, because these young men were from Leeds. And Yorkshire Television is based in Leeds. So I sent it there. I sent it to Irish television stations. But there was never any response from any of them.
So you didn't even get an acknowledgement then?
No.
Right, that's terrible.
I can't remember now, because it's almost 3 years ago. I can't remember whether I actually put in a letter asking them to broadcast it. I most probably did, and I'm pretty sure I did with Yorkshire Television at the very least.
Okay.
But on the disc, of course, it's got my email address. So had they wanted to, they could have contacted me, which is, why I put the email address there, so that they would be able to contact me if they wanted, having watched the film. Because if they weren't going to watch the film, there was no point in them contacting me anyway.
Okay, so you then set about, getting it put out there on the internet, and also you made copies and went around pubs, handing them out, asking people to copy them, etc. And what sort of feedback have you had on the film?
Almost everybody that's seen it believes that it is actually what did happen, just as I believe that that's what actually did happen.
Okay, and where?
I've had very positive. I've had almost no negative responses. The only sort of thing you could consider to be negative is people just didn't take the trouble to watch it. But out of everybody that's watched it, I've had people from all over the world thank me for making the film and opening their eyes, including people from the UK who had no idea about the British government and all of these things that they do. And I had people ask me if I would mind if they translated it into their own languages, and of course I gave them permission to do so, and it's been translated into German, Italian and Spanish.
Okay.
So it's doing the rounds. It's going all over the world, and there are millions and millions of people by now that must have watched it.
Okay. And people can actually download an image file to create their own TV quality DVD.
That's correct, yes, at a website that's run by some people calling themselves Friends of MuadDib.
Can you just name that URL for us, MaudDib, then?
Yes, it's http://mtrial, mtrial.org, O-R-G.
Okay.
So it's http://mtrial.org.
Okay, and people can, if they type in 77 ripple effect, they'll be able to watch it on YouTube as well.
And on Google, yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's on Google Video. It's on Google Video in one piece, I think, whereas on YouTube it's been split into 7 sections because they only allow a short time for each of the YouTube videos. I think it's a maximum of 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's been split down into seven different parts.
Okay, and I do recommend that viewers, go and watch that film to put this whole interview into context. Okay, then let's move on to. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I could just say that if anybody is unable to download and burn their own copies, that if they would just cover the cost for me, and if they would send a donation just to cover the postage and the package and the DVD itself for making it, I would send them a copy, a DVD copy, if they send me that and their address.
Okay, right. Well, let's look at some of the evidence now. Then we mentioned before the Peter Power terror drill. That was one of the main pieces of evidence which made you smell a rat. Now, just expand on that for us. Just explain why that was so unbelievable.
Well, he said that morning they were doing a terror exercise for a company involving 1,000 people. And that they had planned to do a simulation of exactly what happened at the same stations. And then, of course, it went live. And it's just, it's beyond coincidence. It just couldn't. The odds against it are just incalculable.
How many? Do you know how many tube stops there are in London? I mean, there are a lot, aren't there? Off the top of my head. So what's in is at exactly the same time, down to almost to the minute, at the exact same 3 tube stations, bombs went off that real terrorists are supposed to have set off at the same time as a terror drill was occurring.
Yeah, and of course, when governments do this kind of false flag operation, they usually run an exercise and do it, and then it goes live, so that if any of their operatives are caught, they can say, "Oh, I was just taking part in the drill," and get away with it. So that's why they do that. That's why they run the drills, and then they go live. So whenever there is a drill, you want to be very, very careful.
And certainly don't get involved in one.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And don't wear a white baseball cap either.
Okay. Well, let's just look at the video evidence now then, because there was actually very little initially at 7/7. What video evidence did they actually put out initially, shortly after the attacks? Go on.
Well, they didn't put out any video at first. All they put out was a photograph of the 4 alleged bombers outside Luton train station. They put out this photograph, and there are so many anomalies in this one single time-stamped and date-stamped photograph that it's obvious that it's a forgery, that it's been done on Photoshop or on somebody's computer, and
there's part
a lot of people on the internet have done analyses of that photograph, and everybody says that it is a fake and that it's been doctored and it's been made up, and they show the different anomalies. And I've actually now done, and this is also on the Friends of MuadDib website, I've done an analysis. I've taken somebody else's analysis and done some editing and some additions to it of that photograph, showing just why, what the anomalies are and why it is a forgery.
Okay.
And once you establish that, that the authorities have fabricated evidence, you then have to question absolutely everything that they tell you.
Yes, yes. And of course, probably we can speculate the reason why they would use a single frame is that it would be almost impossible to fake actual moving video footage of 4 guys, leaving a tube station.
Yeah.
Whereas
they were actually entering the tube station in this photograph. But yes, that's true.
Okay. Now, the other thing that intrigued me was the type of explosives that were allegedly used, that they were mixed together in a bath in Leeds, I think it was. And I heard
in Beeston, I think it was, which is a district. It's part of Leeds. It's a district of Leeds, Beeston.
Okay, and it was discovered that it was actually military-grade explosives that were in fact used. So tell us about the different types of explosives then.
Well, there was the head of the French police terrorist group came over, and he's the one actually initially released the information that it was not only military grade, it was high grade military explosive that was used. Whilst the official story was that it was, I think it's called TAPT explosive that they mixed up in a bath. It's peroxide that they use, and the TAPT is highly volatile. It's very, very dangerous, and it's not the sort of thing they could carry in a car going over bumps and things.
Right.
And also, they certainly couldn't put it in backpacks and be running up and down stairs to catch trains and all the rest of it. It would be far too dangerous to do so.
And just
sorry, go on.
Yeah, and just to touch on another key piece of evidence, which is the fact that the train that they were initially alleged to have caught was in fact cancelled.
And the following one as well, the one after it was cancelled. And so the government was saying that, they caught the 740 train from Luton to Thameslink, King's Cross. And it was cancelled, and the one after it. So they couldn't possibly have made it in time to be at Thameslink, to then go from Thameslink into the mainline station and then down into the underground, buy tickets, and then catch these tubes. It was physically impossible for them to be able to do so. And nobody on the trains that left Luton remember seeing any of them going from Luton to Thameslink. There's no evidence at all. The people who were there, the witnesses, eyewitnesses, say that they would have remembered if they'd have seen those people on those trains, or on the train that they're supposed to have caught. The government then came out and said that they caught an earlier train, but even if they had have managed, which it's virtually impossible for them to have made it in time, looking at the timestamp on that photograph outside Luton Station, for them to get into the station, buy tickets, and then get up the stairs and get to the platform to catch that train is almost impossible. They would have had to run, and they had heavy backpacks with, we are told, all this volatile explosive. Nobody's going to run with volatile explosive in a backpack. Okay, but even bearing that in mind, even if they had have managed to catch that earlier train, it still would not have got them there in time to have caught the tubes.
That they were supposed
so it's
to.
Impossible. Yeah, so it's impossible for them to have been on those tubes and blown them up.
And did they buy return tickets?
Yes,
do you know?
Yes.
Yeah, they did.
Yes,
right,
they did.
And recently I've seen the BBC, whenever they sort of mention this, they keep showing this clip. I think it's supposedly at King's Cross. If there's three guys, I think, walking through that they're claiming to be the terrorists. Do you know if that image, CCTV image, came out at the time, or is this something that's fairly new? And can you explain why they've come out with this this actual video footage of these alleged terrorists?
Later on, much later on, they've come out because of I believe anyway that because of my film, that they are worried about the effect of my film, because everybody that watches it believes that it is what happened, just as I believe that it is what happened, and I have them banged to rights, and they know that. And so it's got them worried enough that they're trying to extradite me and all the rest of it and punish me for making the film. But they put out, they had to react because the film is so compelling that they couldn't ignore it. I put them in a position where they had to react. They couldn't ignore it because it was gaining traction and people were watching it and obviously believing it, and there are millions of people that believe it. So they had to react. Normally, if something comes along and they're so powerful and all the rest of it, and they're established, and they just ignore things. Yeah. But they couldn't ignore this because it's so compelling. Yes. As you said in the introduction. So to try to fight the effects of the 7/7 ripple effect film, they then came out with this short piece of CCTV footage at King's Cross Station, which is it's very poor quality. You couldn't definitively identify any one of the three that went through there. It wouldn't stand up in a court of law. It could even have been, there's no time and date stamp on it to tell us when it was. So it could possibly, the possibilities are that it could have been them at a later time getting there, having missed the tubes. And so the authorities have blanked out the time and date stamp on that footage purposely. To cover that fact. Or the other possibility is that it could be actors dressed up to look like them. Yes. And we know they're quite capable of doing either of those things. So it doesn't really prove anything. If it was them, and it was later after the tubes have gone, then it's no evidence. It wouldn't stand up in a court of law, and it's very doubtful.
Now, if we just come on to what happened to these guys then after they've missed the tube, do you think they will have got wind of the explosions? So they're at the tube station saying, "Oh well, what we're going to do?" Before they've presumably, as you believe, they went towards Canary Wharf. What do you think happened to them after they got to the tube stations? Because
well, trying to put myself in their position, which is what you have to do, really. If you get there and you're supposed to be taking part in a mock exercise, and then you find out that there's people being killed on the tubes that you were supposed to have caught, and the whole things have blown up, and there's all that chaos and carnage. The first thing you are going to think is we've been set up. And then, of course, what do we do? We're here in London. We're a long way from home. But even if we were at home, they know where we live. Because they recruited us to take part in this. What do we do? They would have been in a panic. Absolute panic. And of course, they would possibly think that the media would help them if they could get their story to the media before they got arrested. That the media would help them, but I know anyway, and most people who investigate these things know that the media are complicit, and that the media only put out what the government propaganda, whatever they're told to print, that they put out, and if the government don't want something put out, they put a D notice on it. And then if anybody tries to say anything, they put themselves in a position where they'll get arrested. The evidence points to the fact that they decided to go to Canary Wharf because Canary Wharf is where Reuters and a lot of the media are, and to try and tell their story there. And they also the possibility, as I've mentioned in the film, that if they couldn't get anybody in the media to help them, there was a possibility, with it being a wharf, the Docklands, that they could get a boat and get away, because they would know that, very shortly the police would be looking for them, and because the authorities would know who they were, and they'd have to get out of the country as fast as possible. But of course, they didn't make it in any case.
Yeah, tell us about the reports of the police marksman then.
Yeah, there was. It was reported in various newspapers that, also on the television, because that morning I was flipping channels on the television trying to catch all the snippets of news, because all the different TV news companies all have different variations of the story. So to get the whole story, you have to try and pick up as much information from different sources as you possibly can. Plus which, you normally get, if you're ever going to get the truth, you're going to get it in the initial reports before the government gets on board and has a chance to censor things.
Yeah.
And so you will hear things in the first reports that then suddenly disappear from the news, and you never hear them again. And so I was flipping channels, and on one channel, and I can't, unfortunately, I've been trying to remember, I can't remember which TV channel it was, but on one TV channel, the reporter said that there had been suicide bombers had been shot and killed in Canary Wharf. And then, of course, it was reported in, I think it was the London Evening Post, and various other, they're on the film anyway, on 77 Ripple Effect. So if anybody wants to know all the ins and outs and details, they can watch the film and see that.
I think I did see fairly recently on the net a YouTube clip of a journalist at a press conference. What's this about terrorists being shot at Canary Wharf, by police marksmen? I'm sure I've seen that, so I'll try and dig that out.
Okay.
The rumours that a police sniper shot dead a suicide bomber at Canary Wharf. Do you know anything about that?
We have no reports of any police sniper shooting dead anybody today.
Yeah.
Okay.
But of course, they will say that there were no reports.
Yes. Yes.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's just consider the strategy they use, where they try and have as few people in on this information as possible for obvious reasons. And if we look at Tony Blair and Ian Blair, you believe that they probably knew the whole scope of the false flag terror attack. You think that?
Well, the evidence points to that. I can't say conclusively that they did know.
Right.
For obvious reasons, only they know whether they did know, and the people that would have told them if they, if they did know. I can't definitively say that they did know, but all the evidence points to the fact that they had foreknowledge of it, which means that they must have been in on it to have foreknowledge. Tony Blair came out immediately and started blaming the Muslims.
Yes.
When the news media were reporting that it was power surges that had caused these explosions and the fatalities and the carnage. So he came out and said, "Oh, it was the Muslims." So, how would he know? How would he know it was the Muslims unless he was in on the plot? And the same with Blair, with Ian Blair, because Ian Blair said about 4 miserable bombers. And then he suddenly corrected himself, realized he'd put his foot in it, and said, "I'm not saying there were 4 bombers." So it's very difficult to believe that they weren't in on it. Looking at, when you look at the dispassionately, look at the evidence.
I had a close look at Blair's first sort of announcement to the press when the news came out, and if you just study his body language, to me, he's definitely covering something up. He's almost acting. Very similar to the way that he dealt with the Diana death, the way that he was trying to turn on the tears almost. It was just so disingenuous when you actually look at it. But that's my own personal view of his, the way that he puts himself across, that he's false, basically.
Yeah.
Now, but if you go further down the chain of command, then if we consider the police, how far, and this is very presumptuous, we don't actually know, we'll put that disclaimer on this, but in order to explain the evidence, do you think there are any other police other than Blair would be in on it then? Or do you think it would just go down perhaps one more level, or because I've got friends in the police, you know, and they don't entertain any of this false flag terror, but they're not high ranking, you know, maybe inspector level, that sort of thing.
Yeah. What you mean, they don't accept that there was a conspiracy?
Yes.
That it was false flag?
Correct, yeah.
They believe the government story?
But they don't look at they don't watch the film, you see, as you said. You see?
Yeah. That's the difficulty. You see, that's why I sent the film out everywhere. You know, by now I've made hundreds. I'm still making copies and handing them out. And I've sent out hundreds. I looked on the internet for the addresses of all the mosques in London and throughout the UK. And I obviously can't, you know, I obviously could not afford to send a DVD to every one of them. But I sent copies to a large number of mosques, asking them to show the film to their congregation and get them to make copies, and including I sent one to Dr. Nassim at the Birmingham Mosque, which is the second biggest one in the UK.
Okay.
And he made 2,000 copies, at least 2,000 copies, and gave them out. And there are other people who contacted me and said that they were doing the same in their areas. So the message is getting out, but the difficult thing is you can give a film to people, but you can't make them watch it. It's like the horse and water situation. There are people that I know locally that I gave copies to, and they still haven't watched them. You know, and I say, "Have you seen the film?" Oh no, I haven't had time. You know, so what do you do? Okay. But it's the ripple effect. If people have to get on board, you know, and they have to help and spread the message and let people make their own mind up. You know, let them watch the film and make their own mind up whether they think I'm right or whether they think I'm wrong. You know. But they need to be given that opportunity, which is why I'm hoping that you're going to be helping with this program to bring that about. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, they've recently announced that there's going to be an inquest. What are your thoughts on that, MaudDib?
Well, they've all the way through. They have been calling these 4 young men the bombers, okay, instead of the alleged bombers. And it always starts off the same, and it started off on the day of 7/7 in 2005. The first news reports were that started to mention about these 4 young men were the alleged bombers, and then it very quickly it goes from alleged, they drop the alleged, and then suspected, and then it becomes the bombers, and then from then on it's the bombers, the bombers, the bombers, the bombers. Every time there's any news goes out, it's the bombers, the bombers, the bombers. These guys, okay, I am convinced that these people were innocent and that they were patsies. They have never been tried in a court of law. There's not been an independent inquiry that has proved in any way that they were guilty of carrying out these atrocities, because that's what they were, atrocities. Also with this inquest, they have said that they were going to hold the inquest for all 56 people who were killed, 4 of whom were these 4 young men, of course. There were 52 members of the public, and there were the 4 alleged, and I will not call them the bombers because it's never been proved, and I'm sure they didn't, as sure as I can be that they didn't do it. And so then apparently the relatives of the deceased were up in arms that how can you include these 4 men in with the inquest for, you know, our loved ones. Well, those 4 young men are also the loved ones of their families.
Yeah.
And if they are innocent, as I believe, then, you know, they've just as much right to be in that inquest as anyone else.
Yeah.
I heard recently that the terms of this inquest, the survivors and the relatives of the deceased have been waiting for this inquest in order to get their questions, some of which may be what I've asked in the film, to get their questions answered. And I understand that they've now been told they will not be allowed to question any witnesses. So they have been kept waiting, and they've been very, very patient. They've been kept waiting for almost 5 years. And it probably will be, no, it'll be more than 5 years by the time, because they're talking about October, I think, for this inquest.
Okay.
And so they've been waiting patiently to be able to get to ask the questions that they want answered. And they've been told that they will not get the opportunity to ask these questions. So they're all very upset about it, and quite rightfully so, because the inquest can also be another whitewash.
Yes.
We've seen so many of them. We saw the David Kelly and others.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard
and they can set the frame of reference for the questions, and so that the questions they don't want to answer never get asked in the first place. So they don't have to refuse to answer because the question never made it into the hearing.
Yeah, sometimes the best way to cover something up is to have an inquiry, as long as the inquiry is run by the correct person.
Exactly that, yeah.
Okay, then. Now, I believe that you sent the movie to some of the people who's died, family members. Now, have you got a feel for what sort of percentage of those people actually agree with you?
I haven't, because there's been I've had no contact from them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to get involved with contacting them and perhaps doing a survey of what they actually truly believe. You know, that would be good to get a snapshot of the victims' families. Would you agree with that? That it would be.
I would love you to do that. I think that needs to be done.
Yeah, because
and it's never going to get done by mainstream media. So it's down to people like you. To actually do it,
because it's all well and good, as in the BBC conspiracy files they took 1 or 2 of the victims and they put them on a pedestal and basically represented all of the victims with that one particular view. And I'd like to know what percentage actually, you know, follow the official story, follow your story, etc., or what they believe. It would be good to do a survey of them, and I will certainly endeavour to do that, because I think that's very important.
Good, yes, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, and then, you know, perhaps I can even try and interview some of them if they would agree. I know it's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to talk about, especially on camera, but you know, if we can get their assistance, you know, perhaps we can basically help spread the word with it and the information.
That'd be great. You know, I would have loved to have got some feedback from them.
But of course, your hands are completely tied now. You wouldn't be able to do any of this that I'm talking about now, otherwise you'd be arrested, and we will come on to that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Right. Now, yeah, we were talking about the BBC conspiracy files. Now, what were your thoughts on that? Because they basically focused a great deal on your film, trying to discredit it. Give us your feelings on when you sat and watched the conspiracy files, because they did come after you, didn't they?
Oh yes, yeah, they definitely did. They contacted me initially by emails and asked me if I would take part in the program. And so I gave them my condition for taking part in the program. And I said to them that if they were to show my film as it is, unedited, on primetime television on BBC first, then after they broadcast the film, I would then help them and I would take part in the program. And of course they refused to do that and said, oh, we can't possibly do that, you know, and will you answer these questions? And so I said, I've given you my condition for working with you, and you have refused to meet my terms. So no, I will not take part in your program, and I will not answer your questions. So well, what they did really was they ambushed me on the street with cameras rolling and asked me loaded, absolutely evil questions that absolutely didn't deserve an answer anyway. But I had already told them that I would not take part in their program in any way unless they met my conditions, which they hadn't met. So I walked through the interviewer and the camera between them, and I walked off without saying a word.
Okay. And one thing that
I was absolutely disgusted.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were. I think a lot of people were, me included. But one thing that intrigues me about things like that is the two. I mean, how many were there? Were there two or three?
There were two of them.
A cameraman and a
there was
journalist.
a cameraman with a camera on his shoulder, and the interviewer, who was called Ollie Bootle.
Okay. One thing that intrigues me, that they're probably quite ambitious BBC journalists, you know, sort of maybe fairly young, sort of climbing the greasy pole, if you like.
Yeah.
What their true beliefs are. Do they think they are genuinely trying to discredit someone who is doing something bad, or do they realise, are they in on the whole thing? Do you know? What do you think? I mean, I know you probably don't actually know, but what would your gut feeling be? Do you think they know that it's a false flag?
They said they'd watched the film.
Right. So it's
if they watched 7/7 Ripple Effect, then they have to be in on it.
Yeah, I would go along with that. Okay, so they've just got no moral courage or scruples in their body, basically. They're just led by their ambition, I suppose, as journalists. Okay, well, last year, some of the families of the alleged terrorists were sort of on trial for assisting in the attacks. And you sent your film to that particular case. Tell us about that, MuadDib, and then tell us what happened to you after you sent your video to the court.
I read in the media about what was happening to these three young men, and I read what the prosecutor said, and the prosecutor said that there was no doubt that the four original ones were guilty of these crimes. And then at their subsequent trial, he then said there is no dispute about these Mohammed Siddiqui Khan and Shehzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain. There was no doubt, and there was no dispute that they had carried out these bombings. Well, millions of people doubt it, and millions of people dispute it. So he was actually committing perjury by telling the jury these lies. The judge, when he had the potential jurors, and out of whom he was going to choose 12, he told them, of course you know that Mohammed Siddiqui Khan, Shehzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay and Hasib Hussain carried out this atrocity. And they can't know that these people carried out this atrocity because it's never been proved. They have been tried by the media. They have not been tried by a court of law. And the evidence, so-called evidence against them, wouldn't stand up in a court of law. They would never be able to get a prosecution, a conviction, with the evidence that is out there, especially with what I put on the film, all the anomalies and all the proof against it. So the judge had no right to say that to the prospective jurors. So they've already poisoned the minds of the jurors before the trials even started with the judge. And then the prosecutor on the first day is saying there's no doubt that they carried out these atrocities, which is perjury. And I couldn't sit still for that. I just absolutely could not sit still, having made the film and knowing that, to my mind, it was impossible for these four men to have done it. I couldn't sit still and let a miscarriage of justice happen. And what I was saying earlier about the inquest, the authorities can limit the evidence that's put before the jury. It can slant it, just as was happening there. They can slant it, they can keep the truth out of the court, and then get the verdict that they are aiming to do. So they are, in fact, perverting the course of justice.
And am I right in thinking that it's actually the law that if you knowingly have evidence for a trial that you know about, that you are duty bound to submit that evidence to the court? Is that?
I would hope that's it. I haven't investigated that side of it, but that's common sense, isn't
Yes,
it? I mean, that you would think that would have to be the case.
And if
but they made up all these rules and regulations and all the rest of it to manipulate everything so that they can do whatever they want. That if a jury, for there to be a proper trial, the jury has to be fully informed in order to come to the correct verdict. If they're not fully informed or they are incorrectly informed, then they cannot possibly give a correct verdict.
Now, one comment,
and
I think...
So,
sorry, go on.
Go on.
One comment I think I heard somebody make, attacking you, is that you sent these films to the jury members. Just tell us what you actually did, MaudDib.
I sent 5 copies of the DVD in an envelope to the court. I sent it to the foreman of the jury. Didn't know who he was, just put to the foreman of the jury in the case of these 3 young men.
Okay.
Care of the court. So they went to the court. So the court then had the possibility of either handing these DVDs, of watching them, handing the DVDs to the foreman of the jury, or not, as the case may be, as they would see fit.
Yeah.
And I also sent a copy to the judge who was sitting on the case to point out to him that he had misdirected the jury.
Okay.
And I sent that to the court. I didn't interfere with any members of the jury. I didn't go to their homes. I didn't stalk anybody.
Yeah.
I was over here. It was
You were in
impossible
Ireland,
to do
right?
that.
Yeah.
I was in Ireland all of the time. I sent them care, both packages, I sent them care of the court. And then it's for the court authorities to decide what to do with them. And there is a technicality in the law. It's called an amicus curiae brief, which basically, that's Latin. In English, it's a friend of the court brief, where somebody who has information can send it to the court, and then the court decides whether, to allow it to be submitted to the jury or not. I thought possibly they would watch the film and they would call me as a witness. But they didn't do that.
No. So,
as
I know, yeah. So,
as you know, yeah.
How long after you or they received that package did you get a visit? And tell us what happened. Was it?
Well, in between. You see, the BBC were not allowed to broadcast their 7/7 hit piece on me, their Conspiracy Files 7/7. They were not allowed to broadcast it because of the trial of these young men.
Right.
So what happened was that I'd refused to take part in it, but I'd sent these films to the court. Okay, so then what happened was that the BBC contacted me by email, and when we're talking about the BBC, we're talking about the government, basically.
Right, yeah.
Contacted me and asked me to take part in their hit piece. And,
so this was after you'd sent the DVDs to the court, then?
Yes, I'm pretty sure
okay,
it was. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, carry on.
And asked me to take part in the hit piece, and of course they were trying to get me to recant on what I'd said and what I'd put in the film, which I wasn't prepared to do. Because I still firmly believe that what I put in the film is the truth. And so, because I believe that because I wouldn't take part in their hit piece and recant on what I'd said, that they then took the legal route and decided to charge me like, if he won't play ball with us, then, you know, we're going to hit him with the bat.
Right. Ah, okay. I didn't realise that the two were possibly connected. The BBC coming over, and you know what then happened to you. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us what happened next with regards to your arrest.
Well, I got a visit from the Garda, which is the name for the Irish police. They call Garda Síochána, which means basically guardians of the peace. But they are the police in Ireland. And there were about 8 of them. 2 of them were plain clothes, and they were from the Dublin extradition branch. And the other were uniformed, and they were local to where I live. And there were about 8 of them, and they came and got me up in, you know, early in the morning. I was still in bed, and they ransacked the place and took away my computers, took away my printer, my DVD burner, and documents, articles, different things, and took me to the court in Dublin, and I was sent to prison on remand. I was in there for 10 days before I was granted bail.
Right. So did they cuff you when they came into the house? Did they handcuff you, or was it?
No. After they handcuffed me after the High Court.
Okay.
Once the judge had said that I was to be remanded in custody, then they handcuffed me.
Okay.
Because up until then, it has to be a court that says something, unless you've been caught in the act of a crime, of course. If you were burgling something, then they would have put handcuffs on you to take you to the station, but I wasn't accused of anything like that. So, but I got the feeling that the 2 plain clothes from the extradition branch, going on what they took and the lies that they told me, they said that if I gave them the DVDs, they would leave everything else alone.
Right.
I gave them the DVDs, and then they went through everything.
Right, okay.
Okay, so they lied to me. And from their attitude, I think that they possibly in link with or work for MI5.
Right, okay.
The Irish people know that the British Secret Services are still have infiltrated and are still here in Ireland, even though it's a republic and it's not under the Crown.
Right.
Or not officially under the Crown.
Right. Of course, it was a European arrest warrant that they had to trump up in order to get you arrested.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, there was. Yes, it was from Westminster Court, Magistrates Court. I think that they got the arrest warrant, and then they applied to the European Court for a European arrest warrant because I wasn't in the UK, and had not been in the UK at any time during this.
Right. So you spent 10 days in a cell, and then you went before the court after that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Then I went to apply to a bail hearing.
Yes.
And the judge granted me bail. And put bail restrictions. They took my passport, driving license, made me promise that I wouldn't apply for any travel documents, and I had to pay a bond. And
did this prevent you from talking to anyone in England and Wales at that point after 10 days?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because the trial of these 3 young men was ongoing.
Okay.
What will probably interest your audience is the fact that they tried to arrest me before these 3 young men's trial started, their second trial, because they were put on trial. In their first trial, the jury could not reach a verdict because basically there was no evidence against them.
Yeah.
And so they had to decide then whether they would let them go or whether they would retry them. And they're so desperate to try to make the public believe their story about these 4 young men and the bombers and all the rest of it, that they were desperate to get a conviction of somebody to say by extension, look, these 3 are guilty of helping the other 4, so the other 4 must have been guilty of doing the bombing. And
I mean, those people would be good people to interview as well, I guess. They're the ones that were accused this time.
Yeah.
Okay, so
The thing is that they tried to arrest me. They had scheduled the second trial, and they tried to arrest me and have me safely in custody before the trial started, so that I couldn't say anything or do anything, anything further. And so the court here made me, one of the bail conditions was that I would not contact anybody in England or Wales.
Right.
Which is why you've had to go to Scotland.
Yes, yes. So after you've spent 10 days in the cell and then they've let you out on bail conditions, they arrested you again, am I right, at some point?
Yeah, because when I had the hearing, the actual extradition hearing came up, the judge, basically the barrister, my legal representatives, didn't use the defense that I wanted them to use, which was that this was a malicious prosecution and he was politically motivated to punish me for having made the film, which is exactly what it's all about, the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I gave him my defense in writing, and he wouldn't use it. And then I stood up at the end of the hearing and to the judge, and I said, you know, can I present this, you know, my statements to the court? And he said, no, it's, he asked the barrister if what I wanted to say was only my beliefs. And the barrister said yes.
Right.
And they weren't my beliefs. I was actually quoting the law in it.
Right. Okay.
So actually the barrister stitched me up.
Right, your own barrister.
Or it appears that way, yeah.
Right, yeah. And you are trying to find, you know, new legal representation, I believe.
Yeah, but I don't think that I'm going to be able to trust any of them, because they're all members of the bar, the British Accreditation Registry. And so they all have a license from the authorities that are trying to prosecute me. So it looks like I'm going to have to defend myself.
Right. So after that point, then, is that when you were in a cell for then 23 days after that? Is that?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, I
right.
was in the cell.
So why would they lock you up for 23 days then? Is that because you were waiting to stand trial for another appeal, or just explain that for us?
Well, what happens is that when the judge orders, if he does, when he orders your extradition, they then automatically take you back into custody.
Right.
Because they are then going to send you to the country that's asked for your extradition.
Right. Okay.
And you have 15 days in which to decide whether you wish to appeal or not.
Right, right, I see. And your barrister actually recommended that you shouldn't appeal, didn't he?
Yeah, he told me that that the judge would absolutely not give me bail, okay, because supporters from this Friends of MuadDib site and supporters of mine from all around the world, they had asked them to send copies of the film to the judges at the court, trying to get them to show that they were in agreement with what I did, that public opinion was on my side, and that they all know that what I did was the right thing to do, that I did absolutely nothing wrong. So in solidarity with me, they were sending copies of the DVD to the judge. And copies of the DVD that in court he had already said that he would watch. Right, so they weren't doing anything wrong. They were sending him copies of a film he'd already said he was going to watch. Yeah. All right. Okay. So anyway, when he gave his verdict, he said that these people had sent him copies of the DVD and that they shouldn't have done that and all the rest of it. And he ordered my extradition. I was then taken into custody and taken back to the prison. Okay. And then the barrister came to see me, and he said, on the strength of the fact that the judge was upset because these people had sent copies of the DVD to the judge, and I hadn't asked anybody to do anything of the kind. Okay, it had nothing to do with me, so I was an innocent victim of that situation. Now, I don't disagree with what they did, because they did what they felt was right. Yes. You know, they're acting on their conscience, and God is their conscience. People think that the conscience is part of them. It's not actually. It's actually God speaking to them telepathically telling them what's right and what's wrong. So when they are acting according to their conscience, they're obeying God's will.
Okay.
Which everyone should do, because if everybody did that, the world would be a very nice place.
Okay. Okay.
But anyway, the barrister came to see me in prison and told me that I absolutely would not, he was absolutely certain that I would not get bail for an appeal. And he also told me that I had absolutely no grounds to appeal on. Okay, and he said that the best thing I could do was to accept to be extradited to the UK and get it over with. So I gave him in writing, I said that, you know, I wanted him to appeal, and I gave him the grounds on which he was to appeal, and told him to apply for bail. So anyway, he didn't want to do that, but I insisted to give him in writing that he did. So anyway, eventually he did file the papers. It took quite a while because it was over the Easter period, and the courts were closed in recess.
Right.
So that's why I had to spend 23 days.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah.
Yes. So I mean,
And
it's just disgusting, really.
Yeah, absolutely. For doing, you know, for doing what is right.
Yeah.
I'm being punished.
Yeah.
Which often happens, as you know.
So
no good deed, no good. They have an expression: no good deed goes unpunished, and no bad deed goes unrewarded.
Right.
And I mean that I fit into that category.
Yes. Okay. Well.
So anyway, we then had the appeal hearing, or the sorry, not the appeal hearing, the hearing for bail. But you can't ask for bail until you've lodged your appeal, and then once you've filed the appeal, then you can apply for bail. And so at the bail hearing, I had the same judge again, and anyway, he gave me bail, which proved that the barrister was absolutely wrong.
Right. Okay.
And he also said that you know, there were serious issues that needed to be looked at, and so he passed it to the Supreme Court. So the barrister was wrong on both counts. He was wrong on the fact that I wouldn't get bail, and he was wrong on the fact that I didn't have grounds for appeal. So anyway, he gave me bail. And then I asked for copies of everything that had been submitted to the court from the barrister, from the legal team. And because I wanted to check that they had appealed on the grounds that I had given them in writing that they were supposed to appeal on. Well, they didn't send me the papers I asked for almost a year.
Right.
And when I got them, it's difficult to say how I felt. I was shocked, but not, if you know what I mean. I was half expecting them to have not done what I asked them to do, again, because they didn't do it the first time.
Right, right, okay.
So I got the papers and saw that the appeals that they'd, the points that they'd appealed on were not the points that I'd asked them to appeal on.
Right.
They were good points, but they were not the ones that I asked them to appeal on. Now, what they should have done was to use the points that I'd asked them to appeal on and add their own these other ones as well to make it a more solid case.
Yes.
But they hadn't done that. So then I had to have a meeting with them, and you know, I managed to borrow a computer and wrote out what I wanted the case to be appealed on.
So they've still got your computer then? Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So you never got your computer? You never got your computer back then?
No, I haven't got any of the stuff back.
Right, okay.
And they even took my... You see, what they wanted to do, the UK authorities, was to prevent me from being able to defend myself. So they took my computers.
Right.
And they took my printer. Now, in the arrest warrant, it says that the DVDs were handwritten and the envelopes were handwritten. Okay? And there was no other correspondence.
Right.
So what legitimate reason could they have for taking my printer?
Yeah. Yeah.
None. Okay? But they took my computers and they took my printer to prevent me from being able to defend myself.
Okay.
Because all my information is on the on the computer, and I need the printer in order to draw up the documents and to print things out to present to the court.
Right, right.
So they took all of that to hamstring me, to try and make it impossible for me to defend myself. So I had to rely on the barrister.
Right.
And I'm not sure whether the barrister is working for me or them.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Well, I mean, if you want to email me anything, I'll quite happy to print it out for you and to stick it in the post.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's very kind of you.
Okay.
I mean, so anyway, I had a meeting then with. I demanded to have a meeting with the barrister and the solicitor, and we had a meeting. And I told them I wasn't happy with the situation, and that I would draw up my submissions to the Supreme Court, and I would give them to them, and I wanted them then to replace what they put in with what I wanted and what I'd asked them originally in writing to fight the case on. And so I drew up the submissions and sent them to them, and they said that they can't do that now. They can't fight them on what I want them to fight on. So in other words, basically what they're saying is they can't go into court and tell the truth.
Right, okay.
So we're parting company,
Right.
and that's the situation at the moment, and it's looking as though I'm going to have to defend myself. But I know I can trust me.
Yes, yes. I mean, I would, just for my own feelings on it, I would proceed with the assumption that you are going to defend yourself and basically educate yourself as fully as you can, you know, in these areas. But I would also, you know, try and find, at the same time, you know, to try and find a barrister who will represent you properly and correctly. So, you know, if there is anybody listening or watching who is a barrister in Ireland who feels that they can help MaudDib, then get in touch with him.
Thank you very much.
Now, so you're now waiting for the Supreme Court hearing on your extradition appeal.
To hear the appeal.
The appeal, right? And you haven't got a date for that yet, then?
Not yet.
I think you know roughly, don't you? You think it might be next year, then? Is it like?
I'm not sure, because they brought out with the EU, since the Lisbon Treaty's been signed. They brought out new legislation, so I think things are being speeded up. So I'm not sure that it will be next year.
Right.
It may be later this year.
Okay. Okay. And just to, you know, if the worst happened and you got extradited and were found guilty, you know, it's a long sentence for perversion of the course of justice, isn't it? Potentially. I mean, I'm not trying to put the downers on it.
No, well, we have to be realistic, and the fact that they want to punish me for making the film, which is what it's really all about. It's not about what I did, because I didn't do any harm, because the DVDs never made it to the jury or even to the judge. So I didn't do any harm. It's not about that. It's about punishing me because I had the audacity to make the film and put forward, you know, another view of what actually went off, which most people believe to be the truth.
And let's just
but to tell you that on the arrest warrant it says that this charge carries a possible life sentence with a maximum of 20 years in prison. So it's a very serious situation.
Okay, then. Well, let's just go back to the terrorism aspect and the broader significance, because the 7/7 atrocity is just one part of their terror campaign. What do you think is the overall agenda? I mean, obviously it's so that they can take over bases in the Caspian Sea region and Afghanistan and Iraq, but do you think that they're planning a world war? Do you know, by involving Iran and China, and as a lot of people believe?
Well, yes. I mean, that's all prophesied in the Bible. So they're working towards that agenda, whether they're doing it knowingly or unknowingly. But that's the way it is headed. It is headed towards World War III. In the book of Revelations, which is the last book in the Bible, it talks about the three last woes, and then describes them. And it's the 7 angels, and the first 4 it mentions, and then it talks about the 5th, 6th, and 7th as being the 3 last woes, and they are actually time periods. And the 5th time period, it tells you that the 5th time period started with the First Gulf War.
Right.
And the next phase would then be involving the 4 angels that abound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels that abound in the great river Euphrates is actually the 4 countries that the river Euphrates runs through.
Okay.
And the river Euphrates, well, your audience probably don't know, but some of them may. The river Euphrates starts in Turkey, and then it runs through southern Turkey, it runs through Syria,
right,
and then it runs through Iraq, and then it becomes the Shatt al-Arab waterway, which is the border between Iraq and Iran. So you have Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, which are the 4 angels that abound in the great river Euphrates. And it says that they will be let loose to draw the world into Armageddon. And that's where we're headed.
okay,
They're talking now about wanting to attack it. Well, have been for some time, as I'm sure you're aware.
yeah,
Talking about wanting to attack Iran. They've already attacked Iraq. Turkey has started changing sides because it's been a member of NATO. It still is a member of NATO. It's been a member of NATO for a considerable period of time, but they're now starting to get more friendly with their Arab neighbors.
right, okay,
And so anyway, the 6th woe, the 6th time period, the 6th angel sounding in the Bible, in the Revelations, he talks about the 7 angels with the 7 trumpets. And when they blow their trumpet, that's the beginning of the new time period.
right,
And it's like, for instance, with a boxing match where you have the bell between rounds. And so it's a sound, they blow the trumpet and the next round starts, if you like, in the Bible.
okay. And just to
and then it says that those the waters of the river Euphrates will dry up, that the way of the kings of the east will be prepared. Well, it doesn't mean that the actual H2O water in the river Euphrates will dry up. It means that the power of those nations will dry up. In other words, they will be defeated.
right,
But that will make way for the kings of the east, which is the Russia and China, the Eastern Bloc. But in Ezekiel, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it tells you about all the nations that are going to be involved in the battle. And it mentions Libya and Persia, which is Iran, and the Russians and the Chinese. So, yeah, that's where it's heading.
okay. Now,
It's very difficult to explain that in
a short interview, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just to touch on the religious aspect, I mean, you know, the BBC tried to criticize you because of your religious beliefs. You know, what would you, because, you know, you couldn't, everything that you've just said to me there with regards to those prophecies, that wouldn't be accepted in a court of law. So people can then use that to criticize you and say, well, how can you say that? It's just an ancient book, basically. How would you answer the way that the BBC criticised you in their hit piece with regards to your religious beliefs? What would you say to them?
They're not religious beliefs. Well, I'm not telling you what. As far as the religious side of it, you know, obviously I can't be 100% certain about what we talked about previously about 7/7. You know, I believe that what I have done is correct.
Yeah.
And what I said in the film is correct. But when it comes to the religious aspect, I don't believe. I know.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And people say, well, you know, what do you mean? You know, obviously you believe. I say no. To use the word believe, there has to be an element of doubt. And I have none.
Okay. Okay, MaudDib. Well, what about just a final message with regards, you know, spreading the word and you know, your film in general? Do you want? Is there anything that you want to say to people with regards to?
Yes, I want them to please, if they can, make copies for everybody and make sure that everybody watches the film, because it's the only chance we've got of preventing what is going to happen. These people are not going to stop doing these false flag terrorist events unless the people actually stop them. And the people have to know what's going on in order to be able to stop them. The only chance we've got of stopping them is when these people know that everybody knows that it's them doing it.
Okay, well, we'll do everything we can to help. I've already got 77 on my website, and you know, we'll try and get it on the TV. And again, we'll try and contact some of the victims' families, and hopefully do a survey, like I said, and try and get some of them on camera.
That'd be really, really good, yeah.
Okay.
You were going to ask me about the name MuadDib, I think, at one point.
Oh, yes, yeah, I mean, this is another thing that the BBC used to criticise you, that you use the name MaudDib. So can you just tell us about that?
Well,
about why you use it?
The name MuadDib is Arabic, and it means the teacher of righteousness, or the educator and the one deserving respect.
Right.
And it's from a film called Dune that was released in 1984. There was a character in it called MuadDib, and he led the people that were called the Fremen, which if you put another E in it, it's the free men.
Okay. Okay.
Against the evil empire, and destroyed it using the weirding way, which is again quoting from the Bible in the book of Isaiah.
Okay.
The weirding way really is explaining to people the truth, and it sounds weird to people. If you tell people that, you know, the governments and people are doing these false flags, then it sounds weird to them. They don't want to, you know, they don't want to believe it, and I wouldn't want to believe it either. Who would?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why I used the name, and also from the fact that they have been blaming the Muslims to use the name MuadDib, which is recognized by the Muslims, by the Arabs,
right.
would make them more willing to accept it than if I was to use an English name.
Right. Okay. That's that makes sense. I haven't seen that film, but I will watch it. I'll get a hold of a copy.
There's an analysis of the film relating it to Bible prophecy on a website. I can give you the link, and you could probably study that before you watch the film.
Right. Sure.
The link is http:// JAHTRUTH.net
Okay.
/Dune DUNE .htm.
HTM. Okay, then we'll take a look at that.
All right.
Okay, then, MaudDib. I'd just like to thank you, you know, for your bravery and your courage, and you know, I'd just like to wish you well with regards to, you know, the extradition, and we hope that you don't get extradited, and we will try and do everything we can to support you over here in England, because your hands are tied by your bail conditions. You can't really do anything to spread the word, but we will try and do that for you. And just like to thank you for taking, you know, all of the time for this interview to talk to us.
Thank you very much, Richard. I really appreciate that. And if in the future, after you've talked to some of these people, if you want to, provided I haven't been extradited or I'm not in prison or anything, and you're not in England or Wales, I'm quite willing to do this again with you.
Right. Okay, then. Well, maybe that'll be a good idea, and then we can progress and you know, see if things are any better than they are now. But you know, we'll keep fighting for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then,
I appreciate that.
Okay. All right, then. Good afternoon, then. Okay.
Good afternoon. God bless you.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. As I said, we are now just going to prove to the audience that we are in fact in Scotland by stepping outside and going to have a look at the signpost. This way. Abertshall Churchyard in Fife. Kirkcaldy. Now, we normally park the Starship above England, but in order to interview this week's guest, we have been forced to reposition the Starship above Scotland, and this is due to the draconian bail conditions imposed on our guest, which state that he is not to talk to anyone in England and Wales about his situation. So without further ado, let's reposition the Starship above Scotland. This week's guest is the maker of the documentary 7/7 Ripple Effect. His film describes what most likely happened on the day of the 7/7 London bombings. It provides a compelling case that the alleged terrorists were completely innocent patsies who were duped into taking part in a mock terror drill. In order to speak to our guest, we have repositioned ourselves in Scotland. This is because he is under bail conditions which prevent him from talking to anyone in England or Wales about 7/7. I'd like to welcome on the Starship, on the line from Dublin, our guest this week, MaudDib. Welcome, MaudDib. Are you well?
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Nice to be with you.
Okay. And just to confirm, we are indeed in Fife, Scotland, to put your mind at rest with regards to your bail conditions.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And I'd just like to start by commending you on the film, because I think it's a very brave thing to have done, especially bearing in mind the way that you've been treated by the authorities. So well done on your film.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now I know that you believe, as many people do now, that the 9/11 terror attacks and the media story which followed was in fact a false flag event, possibly orchestrated by intelligence agencies, the US authorities and Israel. Now, can you tell us briefly what your thoughts are on 9/11 and the reasons behind it first?
Well, the reasons behind it seem to be that from all the evidence that they wanted, excuse me, the American government and the people behind the American government, the shadow government, wanted an excuse to go into Afghanistan and into Iraq. And so they, everybody seems to think that that's the reason why 9/11 happened. The only sort of thing you could consider to be negative is people just didn't take the trouble to watch it. But out of everybody that's watched it, I've had people from all over the world thank me for making the film and opening their eyes, including people from the UK who had no idea about the British government and all of these things that they do. And I had people ask me if I would mind if they translated it into their own languages, and of course I gave them permission to do so, and it's been translated into German, Italian and Spanish.
Okay.
So it's doing the rounds, it's going all over the world, and there are millions and millions of people by now that must have watched it.
Okay. And people can actually download an image file to create their own TV quality DVD.
That's correct, yes, at a website that's run by some people calling themselves Friends of MaudDib.
Can you just name that URL for us, MaudDib, then?
Yes, it's http://mtrial, mtrial.org, O-R-G.
Okay.
So it's http://mtrial.org.
Okay, and people can, if they type in 77 Ripple Effect, they'll be able to watch it on YouTube as well.
And on Google, yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's on Google Video. It's on Google Video in one piece, I think, whereas on YouTube it's been split into 7 sections because they only allow a short time for each of the YouTube videos. I think it's a maximum of 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's been split down into seven different parts.
Okay, and I do recommend that viewers, go and watch that film to put this whole interview into context. Okay, then let's move on. Sorry, go on.
I could just say that if anybody is unable to download and burn their own copies, that if they would just cover the cost for me, and if they would send a donation just to cover the postage and the package and the DVD itself for making it, I would send them a copy, a DVD copy, if they send me that and their address.
Okay, right. Well, let's look at some of the evidence now then. We mentioned before the Peter Power terror drill. That was one of the main pieces of evidence which made you smell a rat. Now, just expand on that for us. Just explain why that was so unbelievable.
Well, he said that morning they were doing a terror exercise for a company involving 1,000 people. And that they had planned to do a simulation of exactly what happened at the same stations. And then, of course, it went live. And it's just, it's beyond coincidence. It just couldn't. I did the script, and then they found the relevant newspaper articles and the footage from the BBC programme. And then a friend of mine who's very, very good with computers did the actual putting of the film together, and then sending me a copy, and then I would make adjustments and say this needs editing out, this needs doing, and all of that sort of stuff, until I got it. I was planning on getting it finished for the 5th of November for obvious reasons, I would think, to most people, British people anyway.
Okay.
And it just all came together at the right time for the 5th of November. We got all the editing done and got everything smooth and no glitches.
What year was that, MaudDib?
That was in 2007. It was we released it onto the internet on November the 5th, 2007.
Okay.
So it's almost 3 years ago now.
Right.
And since.
Yeah.
Go on.
Did you? I mean, I know for a fact that it's like trying to get blood out of a stone, trying to get your work onto television, onto mainstream channels. So did you send it to any mainstream channels?
Yes, I sent it to the BBC because it was obviously relevant to them, and I sent it to Yorkshire Television because it should have been relevant to them because these young men were from Leeds, and Yorkshire Television is based in Leeds. So I sent it there. I sent it to Irish television stations, But there was never any response from any of them.
So you didn't even get an acknowledgement then?
No.
Right, that's terrible.
I can't remember now because it's almost 3 years ago. I can't remember whether I actually put in a letter asking them to broadcast it. I most probably did, and I'm pretty sure I did with Yorkshire Television at the very least.
Okay.
But on the disc, of course, it's got my email address. So had they wanted to, they could have contacted me, which is, why I put the email address there, so that they would be able to contact me if they wanted, having watched the film. Because if they weren't going to watch the film, there was no point in them contacting me anyway.
Okay, so you then set about, getting it put out there on the internet, and also you made copies and went around pubs, handing them out, asking people to copy them, etc. And what sort of feedback have you had on the film?
Almost everybody that's seen it believes that it is actually what did happen, just as I believe that that's what actually did happen.
Okay, and
I've had very positive. I've had almost no negative responses. Odds against it are just incalculable.
How many? Do you know how many tube stops there are in London? I mean, there are a lot, aren't there? Off the top of my head. So what we're saying is, at exactly the same time, down to almost to the minute, at the exact same 3 tube stations, bombs went off that real terrorists are supposed to have set off at the same time as a terror drill was occurring.
Yeah, and of course, when governments do this kind of false flag operation, they usually run an exercise and do it, and then it goes live, so that if any of their operatives are caught, they can say, "Oh, I was just taking part in the drill," and get away with it. So that's why they do that. That's why they run the drills, and then they go live. So whenever there is a drill, you want to be very, very careful.
And certainly don't get involved in one.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And don't wear a white baseball cap either.
Okay. Well, let's just look at the video evidence now then, because there was actually very little initially at 7/7. What video evidence did they actually put out initially, shortly after the attacks?
Well, they didn't put out any video at first. All they put out was a photograph of the 4 alleged bombers outside Luton train station. They put out this photograph, and there are so many anomalies in this one single time-stamped and date-stamped photograph that it's obvious that it's a forgery, that it's been done on Photoshop or on somebody's computer, and
there's part
a lot of people on the internet have done analyses of that photograph, and everybody says that it is a fake and that it's been doctored and it's been made up, and they show the different anomalies. And I've actually now done, and this is also on the Friends of MaudDib website, I've done an analysis. I've taken somebody else's analysis and done some editing and some additions to it of that photograph, showing just why, what the anomalies are and why it is a forgery.
Okay.
And once you establish that, that the authorities have fabricated evidence, you then have to question absolutely everything that they tell you.
Yes, yes. And of course, probably we can speculate the reason why they would use a single frame is that it would be almost impossible to fake actual moving video footage of 4 guys, leaving a tube station.
Yeah.
Whereas
they were actually entering the tube station in this photograph. But yes, that's true.
Okay. Now, the other thing that intrigued me was the type of explosives that were allegedly used, that they were mixed together in a bath.
To give them an excuse to do that. There's lots and lots of evidence that points to the fact that there were no hijackers and that the planes that flew into the buildings were remotely controlled, and that they were not airliners, they were military planes. And then, of course, there's other people who have found thermite residue in the ruins, and which, you know, they're convinced that thousands and thousands and thousands of people, engineers, airline pilots, fighter pilots, all kinds of people are convinced that it was an inside job and that the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition, which is, when you look at the buildings, the footage of the buildings coming down, that's exactly what it looks like.
Okay. Okay, and probably just to stress that they had terror drills going on at 9/11, which is sort of gives us a clue about 7/7.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll come on to that.
Yeah, because apparently there were people who were in air traffic control, and they were saying, you know, is this part of the drill or is this real? Because we have all these different things, anomalies. And so it confused everybody, and it gave them cover to do what they did, which is why it made 7/7 very suspicious with Peter Powers.
Okay, so we'll come on to 7/7. How long after 7/7 happened did you start to suspect there was something wrong with the official story then? Was it
really on the day?
On the day?
On the day, yes, because when Peter Powers came on the television and said what he said, you know, that was a red flag straight away, that there was something wrong there. You know, coincidences like that don't happen unless they're planned.
Okay, well, we'll come on to the evidence shortly, but before we do that, I mean, how did you go about making the film, and did you get any help off any colleagues or anything? Because it's a pretty professionally produced piece of work, I have to admit. I mean, I've made a few documentaries myself, and, you know, sort of on low budget, you've done a very good job, MaudDib.
Yeah, well, on no budget, really.
Yeah.
You can't get any lower budget than no budget. But yes, I had a couple of friends who helped to find the articles online and the footage, and then I put the script together. And they helped a little bit with it, but they were wanting to say things that would have got us in trouble, you know, like libel and things like that. So you have to, as you must understand, with running your TV programs, you have to be very careful how you word things to not leave yourself open to being sued and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And you made these in Dublin. You were living in Dublin when you produced the film. Is that right?
In Ireland, yes.
In Ireland.